Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. This is our G5 deep dive edition, looking at NFL draft sleepers, which means we're one step closer to getting into the post spring, into media days, into fall camps. And next thing you know, college football is back. So this is the natural next step. As I mentioned in our episode last week, it's kind of like graduation day for a lot of the G5 studs that we'd love to pump out throughout the fall. Identifying them, becoming their biggest fans is one of the best parts of this podcast for me personally. I'll also speak for Ianiello, really targeting some of these MAC kids, Sun Belt, Mountain West. Being the first on the bandwagon feels great. And certainly our smugness is over the 100% threshold when it comes to the NFL draft. Because when you hear a name called and your buddies are like, who's that? And you're like, excuse me, you were referring to Khalil Pimpleton III, and he is fantastic. And I'm going to tell you why you should be so excited to have him.
Yeah, he is.
Let's talk about some of our favorite players, and particularly the sleepers in this draft, where only psychos like you and me have watched multiple games of these kids play. But we'll start with a guy who's on the national radar in a huge way, and that's Bailey Zappe. Just one more accolade, one more feather in his cap. It was recently released his Wonderlic score off the charts, the highest for the draft class. Matt Corral got a little bit higher than a pet rock, but Bailey Zappe really high up there. It matters for some positions. Quarterback certainly is up there. Frank Gore, I think, got a 6 back in the day. He ended up playing for 2.5 decades. Doesn't necessarily matter for the skill positions, but a quarterback, you got to feel just a little bit better, if that's even possible, about Bailey Zappe. Where are you with the Zap God here heading into the NFL draft?
Oh, the Zap God. I could talk about him forever. You mentioned last week, I know you touched on, I was wearing my Maction shirt yesterday. Well, I've kept it hidden from you. I wore a special one for today's episode.
Oh, baby, there it is. Look at that.
I got this for Christmas, the Zap Dog in the flesh. You mentioned graduation. I feel like we are the two proud dads of young Bailey Zappe, watching him graduate, and we could not be prouder. Like you said, smart kid. We raised a smart one, did we? Best Wonderlic score ever. And that's huge, especially for a quarterback, especially one of these. Like, yes, we love Zappe. Obviously, we all, if you listen to this podcast before, record-setting season, 62 touchdowns, 5,900 yards. Does he project as an NFL starter? I don't know. Maybe a couple injuries happen. He'll come in. But I think the Wonderlic score is huge for him because he does kind of project as a backup, and I think a smart backup who can study film. He can go in, he can play in any offense, slinging around. Not the strongest arm, but he can make most of the throws. I know a name you threw out when we were texting earlier this week was Chase Daniel, which I love. Can he have that career path? To me, absolutely. To me, another one I look at it, and this is kind of more, I feel like the upside. Chase Daniel's done a lot, or got paid a lot without doing as much. But another guy I kind of look at and compare Zappe to is Case Keenum. Case Keenum is a guy who wasn't even drafted. So he was not even Bailey Zappe's projected, round 3, round 4, round 5. Like, he's definitely going to be drafted. Keenum was not even drafted. He put up 5,600 yards and 48 touchdowns his last year at Houston. Threw the ball all over the yard. Is he still the career passing record holder? I believe he is, because he played like 9 years in Houston. But he's already played 10 years in the NFL. He has started 64 games, and he has carved out a very nice career for himself. So to me, Bailey Zappe could easily have the same career path as Case Keenum. So that's kind of how I'm hoping his career turns out. And I think the Wonderlic score was huge. I think he's a guy that, having that someone who's that smart, knows the offense, has been able to do it at a high level. Obviously made the jump from Houston Baptist to Western Kentucky. Cannot say enough things about the Zap God, punt God. You want those two guys on your team.
I'm going to go a little bit deeper in the cut for my comparison on him. I'm going to go Billy Volek, the old San Diego Chargers backup. I don't care about his win-loss record. I don't care about the touchdowns. Guy made close to $15 million in his career and certainly doesn't have CTE. I think that's a huge benefit of being an NFL backup quarterback. I'd love to see Zappe get picked up by one of the top offensive teams. We were texting about it. You were saying wouldn't be bad insurance policy behind Aaron Rodgers. Someone who gets rid of the ball quickly, can make most of the throws. He's not someone who's going to be confused for Josh Allen or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is, he was so prolific last year because he could handle not only throwing the ball 50 60 times a game. But in so many cases, he was dealing with an empty backfield, no tight end to chip, no running back to help. So he knew he had to get rid of the ball really fast. And some of the complaints I have for the top prospects in this draft, it's a lot of guys who hold on to the ball trying to make the big time plays. He's somebody who I think understands how to play within a system, and he's smart enough to adapt to a system, should he get drafted, let's say in the 4th or 5th round, and put him in a position to be, coming into a camp as an understudy, as a backup. I think this is all trending in the positive direction for him, and I'm really excited. A player I mentioned on the last podcast, I just want to run through quickly, was the guy who threw all the passes to last year, and that was Jerome Stearns. Guy reined in 150 receptions. He ran pretty well and tested pretty well at the combine. Obviously, he's small. He's certainly on the smaller side, but I think he is someone who could, catch on with a team as a 3rd or 4th option. So it's a question in a very deep draft class at wide receiver. Is he someone as a 5th, 6th, or 7th round pick? Is he a, the expression for the college football world is preferred walk-on, but that's not what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for undrafted free agent. Is he someone that a team really has earmarked as, yeah, we didn't take him the 7th round, but we anticipate him making the team? I think so. And he reminds me of James Proche from the Ravens, having a prolific career at SMU. So another G5 hero making good in the NFL. I think that's where he's headed. And also when you look at his performance against some of the better pass defenses they played, it didn't really matter throughout the year, whether they're playing App State or Indiana or Marshall. Like he was there and he was making plays. So I like the kid a lot. Is there any other wide receivers at the G5 level that you're interested in the sleeper category for this draft? Because as I mentioned, there's probably 5 to 6 players at the wide receiver position that are going to go off the board in the first, let's call it 40 picks, that probably have a Pro Bowl ceiling. So a really deep draft class. But who are some of the guys that you have circled that you'll elbow your buddy and say, man, I can't believe you got this guy in the 5th round. He's going to be an impactful player.
Yeah, as you mentioned, very deep draft for G5 receivers. We already talked about Skyy Moore, Jalen Tolbert on the first one. Calvin Austin probably goes in that 3rd round, 5'7". He's small, but he's going to be a fun little gadget for creative offenses. He's a guy that I could see, if Deebo Samuel, depending on his situation, like he's a guy that would be fun in that Kyle Shanahan offense where you could kind of use a little out of the backfield, a little Swiss Army knife you got there. You mentioned obviously Stearns, who I do think I'm hoping sneaks into those late couple rounds, but Alec Pierce is the guy that we probably see come off the 4th round. Khalil Shakir is another good one out of Boise State. I love Shakir. He was kind of a one where I feel like I'm higher on him the most just because I never really believed in Hank Bachmeier. And if you watch Boise State, he was their whole offense. Their entire game plan was just throw it up to Shakir. So I am very high on Khalil Shakir. He's one I'm interested in. One I definitely want to talk to you about a little bit more is Romeo Doubs, because I want to get your take on Carson Strong and how much was Doubs a product of Carson Strong. He's another one that's probably in that 4th, 5th round. You got 2 SMU guys, Danny Gray and Reggie Roberson. We'll probably both hear their names called. Javon Hiley out of Coastal Carolina is another one we'll probably hear called. And as far as the guy that's going to be a late round pick, you mentioned him. Khalil Pimpleton is just one of the most fun players to watch in this draft. I don't know that he has, he does not, I don't think he has Pro Bowl ceiling. I don't know that he's going to be this superstar game changer on offense, but he's a guy that, your team's going to draft him. You've probably never heard of him. And then he's going to catch a ball in the preseason. You're going to go, who the hell was that guy flying down the field? So Pimpleton's one where he's one of those guys where like, the 6th, 7th round, you've never heard of any of these. He's a fun one that he will be fun to watch. So those are just some of the receivers I like. Like I said, I think in these 4th, 5th, 6th rounds, Khalil Shakir is the one I would target because I don't think we know his upside yet. Because I like I said, I'm not high on Hank Bachmeier, so I think Shakir has yet to reach his full potential.
Just to unpack some of the questions you threw out there, Carson Strong. What's interesting to me, the knee injuries aside, obviously that I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but a yellow flag. I don't know what the things on the beach are when it's like 2 flags. Is there a hurricane in the area? It's
not great. I just know that
it's problematic, but he's also a guy who is none of his upside is tied to his athleticism or continuing plays out of the pocket, or it's all based on his rocket arm. My only concern is, and I'll put this to you as someone who watched as much G5 football as anybody. Was there a better supporting cast at the skill positions for pass catchers, wide receivers, and tight ends than what Carson Strong worked with last year in the Mountain West? Like, his assortment of weapons was incredible. I understand that they had some injuries throughout the year, and it was pretty rare that they had a full deck every single game. But when you look at what they had at tight end, what they had at on the perimeter, do you think that should impact some of his stats or how he's perceived at all as someone who had, at least by G5 standards, an embarrassment of riches to throw to? What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think that plays into it. Like you said, he did torch a lot of bad Mountain West competition, and he did have, Romeo Dubs and Cole Turner. But to me, when his arm is just such a difference maker. To me, I'm not saying this, he's gonna be this guy, but to me, he more fits the Josh Allen type of, maybe he could do it because he's got that cannon arm. And sure, he definitely needs to be in a position to have weapons around him. I will give you that, the Stephon Diggs and stuff like that. But it wasn't just, oh, he's got a rocket arm and launched it all over the field. Like, that is what Josh Allen did. Carson Strong was sixth in the country with a 70% completion rate. He had 36 touchdowns and just 8 interceptions. He can make all the throws. And to me, he had a 91.5 passer grade on throws outside the numbers. That was the best among all quarterbacks in this class. So he can make those deep throws. And yeah, he definitely took some chances in college and got away with them because of his arm. He definitely, those 8 interceptions, if he played in the SEC, it's probably more than that, because he would just, fit ridiculous passes into seams because of his cannon. He probably won't get away with that in the NFL, but for me, the knee is the concern with him. He missed his senior year of high school. He's had procedures at the start of last season. The end of last season, he had to clean it up. He's not mobile at all. But I am still really high in Carson Strong. I would take a chance on him in the 3rd round, because that you can't teach that arm talent and the throws that he makes. And yes, he needs to be in a system where he has talented, fast wide receivers who can get open, because if they get open even for a second, he'll hit them. So I'm still high on Strong.
Yeah, the arm strength, I think, is interesting. It's almost like in the NBA when the defense knows that there's one guy on the court that can't shoot threes. It allows them to play a different kind of defense everywhere else, where they're like, yeah, you can be wide open for a 30-footer. Go ahead and take it. The analytics say that we can allow that. In the same way, it's so clear in NFL games with how prepared defensive coordinators are. If you're someone who can't push the ball down the field, it puts so much pressure on the rest of the passing game, because you have people, the safeties walking down, cutting off, those slant routes and those quick hitters. And it just has this snowball effect on how difficult it can be to move the football if you're not someone who can consistently thread the defense deep. So I'm with you there. One other point I wanted to bring up in terms of betting the NFL draft. Obviously, we are a betting organization, so we want to put out, some tools and thoughts to help people make some money on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Pro Football Focus, love them, hate them, however you feel about their organization. One thing that they do that's really cool is they go ahead and they do, they plot where mock drafts have had certain players throughout the process. And it starts to give you a feel, not looking at a single draft, from an expert or from a member of the media, but looking holistically at how the entire market views a player. You can start to get a feel for who's heating up and who isn't. And when you look at Calvin Austin III, who in a lot of ways reminds me of Tavon Austin, at the end of the season, he was borderline 3rd or 4th round pick, according to almost every mock draft out there in the market. And now he's moved up close to an entire round, closing in on the end of the 2nd, top of the 3rd round. So I think that should just inform people. And if you have an opportunity to look at their data for multiple players, incredibly useful, because that is in a lot of ways how the sports books go ahead and they grade out these odds they're putting out there. It's not just based on their own power rankings, which they could get away with if they were handicapping a game, but the market and how people view this, so much is driven by the rumor mill and some of the groupthink that's surrounding it. So I think it would be a stretch to see him go in the 2nd round, but I think if you can see a number for him to go off as the next wide receiver at the top of the 3rd round, I think that's just about the right price. So then it becomes a value proposition. If he starts to slide, I think every single pick starts to give you a little added value on him. I'm going to go ahead and throw out my thoughts on another G5 player. And when you brought up Carson Strong and his injury issues, it reminded me, different injury, but a similar situation. Grant Calcaterra from SMU. It's a guy who started his career at Oklahoma, actually played with, I believe, Baker Mayfield back in the day. He was all honorable mention Big 12. So he's proven that he had a talent to succeed at the highest level of college football, and then goes down to SMU after a host of concussions. Looked like he was going to retire. His career was going to be over. He ends up getting the green light from the medical community and puts up a great season, down there in Dallas. Tested really well, 4.62 40-yard dash, great frame, long arms, ability to high point the ball. In the current NFL, the fact that you're not going to need him to block to be valuable, probably in 1990, this guy doesn't get drafted given the head injuries and the lack of experience as an inline blocker. Both of those are mitigated by the current NFL. So it's a shame that he has this red flag on his resume, but I think whoever gets him, if he stays healthy, even for 2 or 3 years, I think it's going to be a really great steal for a team in the middle rounds, let's say 4th or 5th round, to get someone like him, because the kind of athleticism he brings to the table, and having played in a pass happy offense, I think he's ready to come in, run the complete route tree. He's one of the most reliable, hands in the tight end draft class. What do you think about Calcaterra? And also just some thoughts on SMU as another one of those G5 teams. Is it a system? Could anyone have gone in there and put up numbers, or do you really like the players coming out of it?
I really like Calcaterra. I love that nugget. I agree with you. I think he's a guy that's probably going to be hard to bet on because you don't know which team will take a shot on him. But I agree with you. If your team takes a shot on him late, you have to love the upside. And yeah, you can't say it's a little bit of obviously they had Tanner Mordecai come in and start throwing the ball around. But I mentioned 2 of them, Danny Gray and Reggie Roberson, both 2 wide receivers in this draft as well. They did a good job with transfers, with a lot of weapons. I agree with you. I just think when you watch it in the NFL nowadays, you see these tight end unicorns that come in and are so valuable to teams. And this is an excellent draft for G5 tight ends. We talked about Trey McBride in the last episode, who's the best tight end in this G5 draft class. Probably goes 2nd round. But then, other guys, Isaiah Likely out of Coastal Carolina. See, to me, he's the more one I might worry about system, because he's super athletic, caught 12 touchdowns last year, the 2nd most among all tight ends in the country. But he had just 1 drop all year. He is the one I worry about because this Coastal Carolina offense is so efficient. Everything they do works. They never have a bad play. He had 5 career touchdowns over 50 yards. He is a freak athlete. But you have to wonder is, okay, your teams, they're such a run-based offense that teams are committing to the run and likely sneaks behind them. So he is the one I'd worry about more the system, more than Calcaterra. We already mentioned, Cole Turner's another one. He was 3rd among tight ends in touchdowns. He started as a wide receiver. He reminds me a lot of Mike Gesicki, where he's not going to really give you anything as a blocker, but he's fast, he's big, runs like a gazelle, great pass catcher. So this is, I think, a really, really strong tight end class. Daniel Bellinger from San Diego State's another one that probably gets drafted. I think like 4 of the top 5 tight end touchdown leaders in the country were G5 guys this year. So this will be a fun draft class for like late round tight ends.
To quote our producer, Matt Mitchell, watching San Diego State throw the ball last year, it looked like their quarterbacks were throwing a medicine ball, and completing any pass over 5 air yards seemed like a small miracle. So he could be somebody who flies under the radar just because his quarterback play and play calling and offensive tendencies were just so out of whack throughout the year. I have a few more thoughts. First, I also want to point out, we gave a lot of love to Bailey Zappe at the top, but I'm just going to put this out there. Is Western Kentucky like an NFL draft, making machine at this point? 7 players from WKU drafted since 2016. It's likely that Zappe's off the board. Stearns could go off the board. And let's not forget about D'Angelo Malone, who was a really good edge rusher and could be somebody who could have, greater success in the NFL, where more teams playing that hybrid 3-man front and just setting him up, standing upright to go after the passer. He's someone who in his career with the Tops, he ended up, I think just in the last 2 years alone, 32.5 sacks, or that could be his college career, just looking at my notes, but someone who's very prolific. And honestly, he was one of the only difference makers on that Western Kentucky defense, having bet a lot of Hilltopper games and watched, how teams attack them when their defense was on the field. He got doubled, he got chipped. He was clearly the guy that they wanted to neutralize, and he still put up really good numbers. So just another Hilltopper to consider and not be surprised when he comes off the board. I think he's more of like a 5th or 6th round pick, but I think he has all the tools to be someone who's at least a rotational pass rusher at the NFL level right away. Speaking of defenders, I want to give a little bit of love to the MAC conference, and one guy who ended up just dominating the pre-draft, pre-combine weigh-ins and tests and everything else. And that's Sterling Weatherford from Miami of Ohio. Just check out some of these numbers: 6'4", 225, 4.57 40-yard dash, 36-inch vertical jump, and a 4.28 short shuttle, which those are all incredibly explosive times. All of them, by the way, beat out Cam Chancellor's numbers. Not saying he's going to come in and beat Cam Chancellor. The guy not only had all the physical tools, but played arguably the most physical brand of football in the last 25 years at the position. But I think whoever gets him, he's like Mr. Sub package. He can play that hybrid role of safety, walk up to the line of scrimmage and be a linebacker and help and run support. I think whoever gets him, as someone who, this is a position of need as a pro football fan, it's so obvious to me when teams don't have quality safeties, because they need them to be that jack of all trades and really come up as, this is going back to when I was first introduced to football. I remember my 4th grade football coach would say the safeties are like the firefighters of the entire defense, where it's like they have to mitigate the damage, they have to make quick decisions, and they're put in really difficult positions, and these high leverage positions where you make one mistake, that's a touchdown for the other team. Having been placed in that position and put up really good stats, his tackle numbers were phenomenal for the Redhawks. I think this is someone who's going to make a team instantly better, and I could see him being a 4th or 5th round pick and then instantly being a starter depending on the situation. So that's how high I am on Weatherford. Who's another deep sleeper that maybe you're the only one being the flag bearer for?
So I have 3 guys I want to shout out that are, to me, good value picks. That I think if your team calls them, you've probably never heard of them. And to me, I'd be excited about what their upside could be. I think you always have these G5 guys where you're like, I don't even remember him in college. Why did he end up at this small school? And they end up being a better pro than they were in college. I definitely think there's at least 2 guys who I could put in that category, and then one that's just a fun one. The first one that I love, I know everyone, there's nothing more boring than having an offensive lineman drafted by your team. You're like, yeah, I don't know. I would be very excited if my team drafted Bernard Raymond out of Central Michigan, because he is such an interesting story. He grew up in Austria. He came to America as a foreign exchange student and got a scholarship to Central Michigan after 1 year of high school football. He actually started at Central Michigan as a tight end, but was switched to tackle in 2020. So this guy he is a very good athlete for an offensive lineman. He is 6'7", 305 pounds. Imagine that guy as a tight end. He is still incredibly raw, but his improvement and his size again, you can't teach the size. And his improvement was what really stood out to me when I was going through his numbers. He allowed 0 pressures at all over the last 6 games of the season. He was the 4th best graded of any offensive tackle in the country. So he's a guy at Central Michigan. If you knew who Central Michigan's I watched a lot of Central Michigan. I didn't know who this guy was until I started doing draft prep. And then I started watching his clips. And, again, the size jumps out immediately. He's a freak athlete for a guy that big. So given his, he's only been playing football for 3 years. So he's a guy I'd be very excited about, that we have not yet seen his potential, because if they can channel his speed and size and continue to help him grow, like I said, no pressures allowed in the last 6 weeks. So that's a guy I'd be big on. And another one I think that would be very fun on a defense is Logan Hall out of Houston. He had a very good year, but what I love about him is his versatility. He can play both inside and outside. Houston used him more as a D tackle, just because Houston's D line was nasty with, Anini, and they had all these sick D ends. I think he probably projects more as a D end in the NFL, one of those kind of gadget edge rushers, but he can go inside. He's 6'6", so he's very tall, but he only weighs 283 pounds, which gives him, he is big, but he is super fast, freaky athletic. He needs to get a little better with his hands, like at the point of contact, but he's got great moves for a pass rusher. So I really like Logan Hall. I think he's a kind of a fun late round project, because you can kind of play him wherever you want. And then the last guy, or not last guy, but another guy I want to give some credit to that at the last rounds, I'm like, please, Packers, please take him, please take him, please take him, is Marcus Jones out of Houston. One of the most electric players in the country. He's Houston's cornerback. He probably projects more as a slot corner in the NFL because he is very small. This dude is crazy fast. And his first step is like shocking how he goes 0 to 60 in a step and a half. He is at full speed. He is probably the best kick returner we've seen, in a while. I'm not going to throw out the Devin Hester, D'Angelo Hall names, but I just did. He had 9 kick return touchdowns in college. That's tied for an NCAA record. Like I said, he catches the ball. He's at full speed. So Marcus Jones is super, super fun to watch. So he's a guy I definitely want my team taking late in the rounds just because every time he catches a punt or a kickoff, he could take it to the house and he could do it very quickly. So Marcus Jones is definitely a name. I'm excited to see who takes him.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought him up. I believe he sat out the bowl game for Houston. That had an impact on their bowl game. And I think also what you're seeing with a lot of these players opting out of the bowl games, was it the right business decision? Yes. Did it hurt him in terms of overall visibility? I also think that came into play because I agree. He's someone who is tailor-made to have a huge impact at, arguably 2 or 3 positions right away in the NFL. It'll be interesting to see if they try to just focus him in at one and try to, refine his craft a little bit as opposed to playing him all over the field. But he's certainly somebody that I'm excited to see at the NFL level. And the points for I told you so, or I knew this guy before he was cool, a little bit of college football hipster inside info. I'm excited to talk about him in the years to come. I'm going to end this with just a quick conversation about the college football season coming up. I try to hold off from doing this as much as I can throughout the entire off season, because once you start going down this rabbit hole, it can get difficult to get your mind right and to back out of it. But I'm already looking at week 0. I'm already looking at week 1. Last year we did a really nice job kind of setting the stage for some of the upsets that came in September in college football. Are there any games that you're looking forward to early in the season? And if not, I have a couple that I'd like to throw your way to just gauge your interest. I'll start it with, and maybe this one was already targeted for you, but NC State, who it would far be it from the Wolfpack to buckle under preseason expectations, a team that's, I think they've taken the mantle from old school Clemson, where there was a Clemsoning situation. NC State now is just being overhyped to a crazy level. I've seen multiple too early top 25s with them in the top 10. I don't necessarily see that. But they're opening at East Carolina, a team that has been, absolutely just prickly and difficult to deal with. And can you imagine how electric their home crowd is going to be in Greenville with an opportunity to take down potentially a top 10 program? How do you feel about the Pirates? And is that a game that really gets your chili running hot to start the college football season?
It's so funny you mentioned that because I have not looked at the schedule at all. So even as you started talking about NC State, I had no idea who you were going to say they were playing. And I was trying to think of my follow-up. And what I was going to say was, it's not a true come out of nowhere like he was, but Holton Ahlers might have to be our Bailey Zappe this year because
whoa, big talk there.
He's one of those guys where like he has so much. He always looks like he's like one step away from being like nasty, and he just doesn't really get there. And he's back for what, his 7th year. So I'm hoping he does get there. I love it. Just like I said, I've not looked at the schedule, so just at the top, I didn't know you were asking me this. At the top of my head, I'm excited to bet whoever Northern Illinois plays to beat the wheels off them early in the year, assuming Rocky Lombardi's back, because they were they pulled the lucky rabbit out of their hat every game to the MAC championship. I'm going to continue to lose all my money betting against them. So I'm excited to watch whoever they play in the early non-con beat the brakes off them. Fresno State, they'll probably be a popular one. I think they kind of jumped that bandwagon, but I'm still riding them. We were on them a lot last year. So Fresno State's definitely one I'm excited about. And yeah, we will be on ECU quite a bit this year.
Northern Illinois opening up with Eastern Illinois, little battle of the directional Illinois there. But they do get an opportunity near the end of the month at Kentucky. So an opportunity to show out.
Yeah.
I'm really glad, though, that you
It's
got to bring this out.
game.
Bringing up Northern Illinois, it allows me to bookend what has been a really positive podcast and a lot of good vibes being thrown towards G5 players. I would like to do the opposite, because for those of you that bet on them in their bowl game, and it was one of my longer legged parlays and needing Northern Illinois to win that game, it's really hard to run a red zone offense inside the 10 for 3 plays and not throw the ball in the end zone once. So the Huskies were able to accomplish that. They are they're not quite on my do not bet list, but they are certainly a team that as soon as I see that little Husky logo, just starts to fire me up. And that's what college football and college betting is all about. You have teams that have this soft spot for you. You have teams that you'll slam on the table as soon as you think of them. But Northern Illinois is in the doghouse for me, no pun intended. Mike, this has been great. Do you have any other final questions before we wrap part 2 of our draft G5 podcast here?
Yeah, I actually do have one more question. And maybe this is going to be way out of order because I thought of it as you were talking about something else. I was looking at my notes. To kind of go back to the draft, I was looking at, one position we really haven't talked about at all, and I want to get your thoughts on. Overall, I think everyone agrees this is a very weak running back draft class across the board. We really haven't talked running backs at all in either of these episodes. I think I mentioned last week, I think Tyler Algier is the top G5 guys. But I'm going to run down some of the G5 names I expect to be drafted. These are guys we did like in college. Do you see any of them having realistic NFL starter, upside, even reliable backup, two-headed monster? We got Tyler Algier out of BYU, who I do think he has obviously the most upside. Jerome Ford at Cincinnati is interesting because he Alabama transfer, obviously. He does have that, speed. That in the games he has speed, but he tested really poorly at the combine. He ran a 4.46. And for a guy who's known for being that breakaway speed, that was a pretty weak 40 time. And then some of the, down the list, some of the other names, obviously our boy, Sincere McCormick, who we love. How does he project in the NFL? Devontae Price from Florida International, Ronnie Rivers from Fresno State. Kind of a disappointing year, to be honest with you. Brian Koback from Toledo. I believe he finished leading the country in rushing, right? Or did, what's his face for Michigan State? Shamari Jones, another one, Coastal Carolina. Do you see any of them having, what's kind of the ceiling on any of those guys in your opinion?
When you're running through the names, Sincere McCormick is a player who I think certainly can handle an NFL workload. But the one that, two jump for me. Jerome Ford, I don't care about any of his measurables and, quote unquote, playing football in shorts. When I watched him, he was the only thing that was explosive outside of Alec Pierce in the Cincinnati offense. He can be a home run hitter. He has good size at, over 210 pounds at his frame. So I like him a lot. I think he could end up being the best G5 running back from this class. But I'm glad you brought up Devontae Price, because if you're going to take a swing and, hope for an Alfred Morris type player late in the draft who ends up coming in as a rookie and running for over 1,000 yards, I want a home run hitter. I want someone who, in a current NFL landscape where in most cases you have 3 and 4 wide receivers on the field, you're spreading things out, he is a legit sub 4.4 guy, and he had some huge runs for the Panthers this year, an FIU offense that was a mess otherwise. So he's my pick to, if he ends up going in the 6th and 7th round, I would feel really good if I needed a rotational running back from an NFL perspective to add into the mix. I think he's somebody who could pop going from a bad offensive situation to FIU. If he gets in the right situation in the NFL, I think that could be really advantageous for him. So I'm glad to see that he's on people's radar at least.
He's a crazy one. When I was looking through like different mock drafts from, the 10,000 websites that do mock drafts, like I saw his name popping in like the 4th round. And I think one of them had him like 3rd round. And then there were drafts that had him 7th round. And there were drafts that had him undrafted. He definitely seems to be the one where people cannot get a read on him, where, like I said, he's maybe the widest range of draft projections I've seen of any player in the G5. So I'm glad you kind of went into a little more detail on Price, because he is kind of my one I'm most interested to see where he ends up.
Yeah, one of the hard things to kind of quantify or put a grade to or really understand is, and I'll put myself outside of the draft circles. That's not something that I do for the Action Network or spend a lot of time kind of dissecting. But one of the hardest parts is understanding the importance of pass protection from the running back position. And every single thing that I read about him, it was in the weakness category. And that makes it difficult for teams. Like you have to be such a plus pass catcher to offset that because in a lot of cases, yes, they're going to bring him in to be a change of pace. But if it's a pass play, even if he's, running a route, the quarterback needs to have the faith in him. If he calls an audible because the numbers aren't right, at the line of scrimmage, that can he actually add any value or protect your number one asset for your NFL franchise? And I think that's what keeps a lot of these home run hitter running backs who are kind of just a single type player, and he's that speed player, keeps them on the sideline because they can't be trustworthy in pass protection.
You draft Devontae Price, the Eagles, because they have like 17 players that are just like him, and they just continue to sign and draft running backs that are the exact same player. He has Eagles written all over him.
All right, you heard it here first. Mike Ianiello calling the shots. Price to the Eagles. I'm sure an exacta bet. If you can find a book that'll take it, I'll give you, 50-1 odds on something like that. So I like ending it on that note. For Mike Ianiello, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the Group of Five Deep Dive under the Big Bets on Campus podcast banner. Excited to bring you college football contents. We'll be back over the summer, getting into season previews, futures, all that good stuff to get you fired up for the return of college football at the end of August, getting into week 0. We'll be here with all the G5 action and also hopefully to break down some of the musical chairs. The Big 12 essentially going in and rating the AAC. How does the AAC respond? The Sun Belt now potentially positioned to be the strongest G5 conference moving forward. Lots of interesting intrigue to dig into there. And as we said in the podcast last week, maybe they'll send us to Sun Belt Media Days. It's gonna keep throwing that out there, speaking it into reality, a little bit of magical thinking. All right, that's it for us. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the NFL draft.